If you want to improve, you must be content to be thought foolish and stupid. That was written by Epictetus and is still true today. There really is no room for ego in the growth mindset. We must always be able to see our ego and its need to feel great and to ignore the attraction of seeking admiration from others compared to focusing on our own efforts. The reason that the ego is the enemy of growth mindset is that it wants you to be the best and to feel like your work of self-improvement is complete. But that is a fixed mindset form of thinking, because growth mindset is not about comparing yourself to others, but about comparing ourselves to ourselves. And instead of being the best, growth mindset is interested in becoming better than yesterday. Eckhart Tolle said that when the ego is lost, limit is lost, and you can live with the growth mindset and become a more infinite thinking person who's kinder and more beautiful soul for the company of yourself and those around you. So, hello and welcome to the Growth Mindset Podcast, diving into the psychology of self-improvement and today's topic of ego. I am your host, Sam Webster Harris, and as we are in a season on ancient philosophy and stoicism, we can't not talk about ego because it has been with humans since the dawn of time, and the Stoics had something to say about it. Ryan Holiday also has a really good book on ego. It's called Ego is the Enemy, which I thought had a very good structure for discussing ego because you could literally go into everything. So we're just limited to like a few areas that are relevant to success and growth mindset as much as possible. And we might do some more things on ego at other times in the podcast. I'm also going to borrow some of Eckhart Tolle's work on ego and some of the other Stoics in general. In regards to the growth mindset, ego gets in literally every single area you could think of and can limit us from being who we could be. But I'll stick to three main areas where ego could be a major blocker for us and give some stories from history and ways that we can overcome the elusive ego's nature to lure us into fixed mindset thinking. We'll talk about how it appears during our aspirations and when we set out on a new path, which is of course relevant to anyone having big ideas for New Year's. Then we will see how ego can damage us when we do have success, and of course, where it becomes a barrier if we suffer from failures. Ego can be a hindrance to our personal and professional development in all areas of life, so only by cultivating humility, self-awareness, and a focus on continuous improvement can we lead more fulfilling and successful lives. And today's episode's definitely going to be fun and probably a slightly longer one. I've been going through my Spotify Wrapped and all of my comments, and it does seem like my slightly longer deep dives are the most preferred episodes of all. So I'm going to try and do more of them. I have literally just got back from the Himalayas, so I've been a bit busy, but I've been able to get this one down and I'm looking forward to it. And come January, there's going to be probably a lot more like this as I will be going more full-time on the podcast. So thanks for all of the increased listening of all the new listeners here. I've literally started doing other things and then becoming a full-time podcaster. So this is very exciting for 2024. I'm sure what I'm about to talk about today will be very useful for me. And so with that, let's dive into the episode. So the first part of ego is with our aspirations and starting new things, because we all have aspirations, and a useful part of the ego is the belief in ourselves to aim higher and do greater things. However, it can be a danger when our ego could blind us to our current reality or make us overestimate our abilities or to become impatient for success. Expectation is not only damaging to happiness, but it also damages our potential for success. If we believe that we should be successful very fast or just by right, then we fail to plan for difficulties or maintain the patience and humility needed to succeed. As the world moves faster and faster, we can compare ourselves on Instagram to 20-year-olds who seem to have started a billion-dollar empire or become crypto millionaires overnight. And we seem to think if we try hard for a bit, then we deserve to have instant success because it's our right to have the success just like everybody else is getting. Not only is this damaging to our happiness and also false because not everyone's getting it, but it leads us to choose riskier strategies and to not put in the hard long-term work needed to actually get success. And not putting in hard work is a very risky strategy because it never works. In reality, the truth is that most entrepreneurs who are successful are actually older and more experienced and have more knowledge of an industry they're going into, and they have more knowledge of how the world works. They are probably better communicators and managers, and they're less likely to mess up things like their accounts. And most people that plow their money into crypto end up losing it whilst hoping to make fast money. You only hear about the people that do well because the people that haven't done well aren't going to talk about it. So having some space for humility can keep us in check and keep us less likely to fail. And if we do try our hand at entrepreneurship or investing, for example, we should expect that we will make some mistakes, and we should be very self-critical of our own knowledge and always curious to hear how we could improve, and to love any difficult feedback that doesn't make us sound brilliant, because those are the areas we probably most need to improve on. When we start a new project, our ego craves for instant recognition and validation, and that can make things much worse. If we want praise for how good we are at things, we'll completely ignore the sources of feedback and struggle to make improvements at all. Now, of course, it seems ridiculous to imagine someone claiming they are the best basketball player ever on their first day of practice. And yet many people quickly want to be seen as the best, even in areas where it's clear to see they aren't the best in things like basketball. But if you think about other areas, it can be much harder to keep ourselves in check, because things like entrepreneurship or investing are very solitary. So even though you don't think you're claiming to be the best, you might be doing behaviors that only the top 1% can succeed at. And if you're going into investing and you're using leverage and taking loans and doing things, these are very dangerous things that only very experienced people should try doing. And even then, a lot of them fail. So if you've only just started investing and you're trying to do these things because someone on YouTube has said that you're going to be good at it, it's a lie. And it's very easy to be in your own bubble of belief, but actually you're making things bad for yourself. Even in other areas like dieting, blogging, becoming a parent, we probably all know someone who, even when they've just started that thing or never even done the thing, will still think they have the right to lecture everyone about it as if they are an expert. And we can all see how much of an idiot they are. Yet we can fail to see how sometimes we also slip up into thinking that we know more than we do. We forget that silence is the respite of the confident and the strong, and that the ability to deliberately keep yourself out of the conversation and subsist without validation from others is so much more powerful than we realize. One of my all-time favorite sayings, like ever, is that insecurity screams, confidence whispers. Because if we have proved to ourselves that we're brilliant, we don't need others to acknowledge it. We're already confident. Whereas if we're insecure, if we want people to think we're good, we have to put a lot more effort into looking good rather than just being good. So we must always focus on humility and be much more eager to learn from others and be willing to put in the hard work without expecting immediate rewards or praise. You may have watched the Leonardo DiCaprio movie, The Aviator. That's based on the life of Howard Hughes. He was a very wealthy and successful businessman and aviator in his own right, but he wanted to be seen as the best. He started new projects to build the biggest and fastest commercial airplane ever built. And it was his ego that led him to take unnecessary risks because he believed he was the greatest and he wanted to be seen as such. But ultimately, that led him to almost dying in a plane crash and reevaluating his approach and realizing that he wasn't invincible or some touch genius. He became much more humble and aware of his mistakes and that his mistakes might kill him. And that made him, in the long run, more successful in building much safer aircrafts that actually did start to break records. And sometimes when we have a passion for something, it can be masking a weakness. The breathlessness and impetuousness and franticness are often poor substitutes for discipline, for mastery, for strength and purpose and perseverance. So before you get caught up on something quickly, think if you would still do it if you had to do the repetitive, boring part of it just to get there, because of most success is always going to have a lot of repetition and boring parts. And whilst we're on the topic of starting new things, I think George Washington is a really good example of how to be a humble human. He was the very first president of the United States. He could have got lost in his power and thinking that he was a better ruler than anyone else could ever be, and he could have craved for more. Instead, Washington's humility and focus on the greater good were essential in the early days of the nation of the United States, and he voluntarily relinquished power after 2 terms and set the precedent for the peaceful transfer of power that still exists today, and it is just an essential pillar of democracy. So instead of getting lost in wanting to be the best, he made sure that he set something down that would keep all people good, regardless of whether he was there or not. So quickly, the 5 biggest problems of ego when we start new things is 1, impatience for quick results. Many people will want immediate success. Their ego-driven desire for instant gratification will actually lead to frustration and disappointment and cause them to give up. 2, will be hesitant to ask for advice or assistance when starting something new, and fear appearing inexperienced or incompetent, and that will hinder all our progress and our learning. and actually make us less good, which is highly ironic. Number 3, resisting constructive feedback, because the ego can blind us to our own weaknesses and prevent us from accepting constructive criticism. We end up dismissing valuable input from mentors, colleagues, or customers and miss out on opportunities for improvement. Number 4, overpromising whilst underdelivering. In an effort to impress others, we may exaggerate our abilities and make grandiose promises when embarking on a new venture or project. This ego-driven behavior can lead to disappointment and a very difficult struggle to fulfill these unrealistic expectations and ultimately never actually being able to deliver the thing. And number 5, just ignoring market research. Entrepreneurs and business owners may believe they have all the answers already, and due to their ego, just neglect to properly understand the market they're going into, or not even look at their competitors as if their competitors are actually trying really hard and are a bunch of humans that are also making logical decisions. This can result in us developing products or services that actually just don't have a real demand, and we can miss out on key insights that would let us create something that would actually be useful for the world. So, ultimately, I think we can summarize that what replaces ego is humility, but with a solid humility, we actually have a more lasting confidence. Where ego can be artificial, the type of confidence based on humility can hold weight and last the test of time, and even outlast us, as in the case of George Washington.
The Growth Mindset is sponsored by Factor Meals. Whether you are preparing for school, gearing up for a new project, or making the most of the rest of summer, you can fuel up for your days with Factor Meals, no prep, no mess, healthy meals that are designed to help you hit your wellness goals with less sacrifices. They have an array of chef-crafted meals like their Calorie Smart range or keto, vegan, or my favorite, the Protein Plus, that will keep you fueled up with their fresh, dietitian-approved meals. From things like blackened salmon, shrimp, filet mignon, or other things that I can say like roasted red pepper tortellini. Unlike the difficulties talking about their meals, eating nutritious food can be effortless and delicious. Listeners of the show can receive 50% off their first order and 20% off their second month at factormeals.com/growthmindset50. And if you use the code growthmindset50 at checkout, you will have 50% off your first order. So again, that's factormeals.com/growthmindset50.
Now on to part 2, ego and success. Success can be intoxicating and lead to a sense of invincibility. As people achieve their goals, ego can swell, making them more vulnerable to complacency, arrogance, and just a loss of any perspective. We can become overconfident in our positions, we can stop doing the important work required to keep it, and success just doesn't guarantee continued success. I'm sure you've heard that before, and you will hear it again. And in fact, you can certainly argue that overconfidence can lead to our downfall because it blinds individuals to their weaknesses, and it prevents them from adapting to any of the changing circumstances that are always changing. And I'm sure you all know about the sports team, for example, that expects to win so easily that they don't actually try hard enough. And then they end up getting surprised when things don't immediately go their way. As they say, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. When we develop an expectation of our brilliance, we fail to put in the work to be brilliant. And the point about success is that when it goes to your head, it becomes very easy to fool yourself. And as Richard Wiseman said, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, but you are the easiest person to fool. For example, you may have heard of the banking crisis in 2008 and the collapse of the Lehman Brothers. As the leaders of one of the most successful firms of all time, they had become blinded by their own success. Not only did they fail to see the warning signs of the impending disaster, they didn't think that they could be taken down by it, and they were too busy making easy money with subprime mortgages. Now, a rational person might think that money so easy to make would ultimately lead to problems. But when you've already made so much money giving out mortgages, you could understand why you might expect that you could just give out more mortgages to people and end up making lots of money. But ultimately, their ego-driven decisions led to the collapse of the company and the unraveling of the entire economy. And this is why we shouldn't let success get to our heads. Again, I'm going to just quickly highlight 5 areas where ego can block you when it comes to success and actually lead to your failure. Number 1, arrogance and hubris. Success can really inflate our ego, of course, and it can lead individuals or organizations or teams or even armies to believe that they are invincible or infallible. This arrogance can blind them to potential threats and challenges and make them more vulnerable to failure. Number 2, resistance to change. When people or companies experience success, they may resist change because they believe that their current methods are foolproof or that they own the market or something. This resistance can hinder adaptation to new technologies, to new markets, or to changing customer preferences. Number 3, lack of accountability. Success can lead to a serious lack of accountability because individuals or organizations become less critical of their actions and their decisions. They can start to avoid taking responsibility for any failures and instead blame external factors because, of course, what they're doing is brilliant. So it must just be something wrong with the world. That's why things are going wrong. And when you start blaming the world instead of taking your own responsibility, that's always a recipe for disaster. Number 4, ignoring feedback. Very successful individuals may surround themselves with yes men or yes women, or even accidentally get surrounded by yes men and yes women. And these people reinforce their ideas and their decisions. When you don't have a sounding board that's willing to tell you that you're being an idiot, this can result in the lack of any constructive criticism and feedback and prevent your further growth and improvement and blind you to the things you need to do to change and keep up. And then number 5, just resting on our laurels. Success can make us feel complacent, and it may also have taken us a lot of work to get there. But then when we become complacent, we feel like we can just rest on our past achievements rather than perhaps taking a short break before continually striving for more excellence. And this complacency will lead to a decline in performance and a decline in any relevance in the area we want to work in. You can see this in individuals and companies. If you ever heard of Kodak, Kodak was a very successful company in the photography industry for many, many years. And they actually invented the digital camera. But their ego and reluctance to embrace the new technology led to complacency because they figured they had a better business using the film cameras that they had at the time and couldn't be bothered to try building this new market with the new technology they had. And they completely underestimated the impact of digital photography, and then other people started doing it, and it eventually led to the decline of Kodak and their bankruptcy. And you can see the exact same thing happen with Blockbuster. They were the dominant player in the video rental industry, and they could have definitely been a dominant player in the online video rental industry, but they just didn't innovate. They just kept going on their main area of income, which just dwindled to nothing, and they became bankrupt. And again, Nokia, they were probably the biggest mobile phone manufacturer on the world, but they remained complacent and ego-driven in their own superiority, and they failed to adapt at all to the smartphone era, which eventually led to their downfall. And besides organizations, you can see the same thing with individuals. Like Steve Jobs had some immense success, but due to his ego, he actually faced some serious setbacks and conflicts during his career, to the point where his stubbornness and refusal to accept feedback from others led to the point where he was actually fired from Apple, the company he'd started in the 1980s. And actually, this was a great thing for him because he became more humble, he became more collaborative, and he learned to work better with others. And he actually returned to Apple many years later and turned the whole company around and made a much better company and created the Apple we know today because of his growth as a person. So as we can see, success can be a breeding ground for ego, complacency, and a false sense of invulnerability. I would certainly encourage all listeners to remain humble, maintain a sense of self-awareness, and continue to learn from others and adapt even after achieving your success. And this is probably the point of why you listen to the Growth Mindset podcast after all. It's because you want to maintain a growth mindset. You may have heard of Ed White, and if you haven't, well, he was the first American astronaut to conduct a spacewalk. That means leaving your spacecraft and going around in open space, which is a nuts and scary thing to do. Despite getting into the astronaut program, which is one of the most competitive, difficult things you could do at the time, he never thought that he knew better than those around him. During his training and his space missions, Ed White was known for his humility and his down-to-earth attitude, pun intended. He was never too proud to admit when he didn't know something or when he needed help. In a highly technical and risky environment of space, where a single mistake could lead to a catastrophic consequence, killing perhaps you and all your crew, his willingness to acknowledge any limitations he might have and to seek assistance was crucial. In space, there is no room for overconfidence, and there is no room for refusing to accept help or guidance from other astronauts or engineers or your mission control. And it was because of his constant commitment to learning and problem solving that he was then selected to be the first American to ever do a spacewalk. So even when we've achieved incredible success, we can achieve even more by remaining humble. And I think that covers success and how a growth mindset without ego encourages more success. And as they say, the biggest challenge after success is shutting up about it. So let's stop talking about success now and move on to failure. Ego often prevents us from accepting and learning from failure, as it leads to denial, defensiveness, and a reluctance to admit our mistakes. You may have heard of the company Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes, who was recently sent to jail. Well, she was the founder of the healthcare technology company called Theranos. And she exhibited some serious ego issues when it came to acknowledging failures. Her company failed to make the product that she first wanted to make, and she continued to mislead investors and the public about it. She consistently lied about the company instead of investing in fixing mistakes or learning from the failures and trying to build something similar or different. Her ego just prevented her from accepting the reality of Theranos' shortcomings and the fact they couldn't build what they first wanted to build. Because she kept on lying and saying that they had done it, she ultimately built this huge business that was meant to be apparently doing these incredible things that just didn't exist, and she had a company full of just lies. And ultimately, she still had to try and deliver a product that just never worked, and the company then collapsed because they just weren't doing this magical thing that didn't exist, because they just simply were unable to make these magical blood tests that just couldn't exist. So after creating this billion-dollar company, it eventually was found out that it was just lies and the whole thing collapsed, and she has now gone to jail because of this. And a similar thing happened at Enron with their scandal. The leadership of Enron, which was once a major energy company, just demonstrated ego-driven behaviors by engaging in fraudulent accounting practices just to inflate the company's success. Their unwillingness to admit their failures and to face the consequences of them resulted in one of the largest corporate scandals in history. If we accept that failure is part of life and learning how we can get better, we unlock something much, much bigger. Now, you may have heard of J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter. Well, when she was younger, she had a marriage and a child, but the marriage turned toxic and became full of abuse. Her life fell apart. She had to run away to try and get back to her family in the UK, but she didn't stop trying to learn from her mistakes. She didn't stop trying to seek a better life. She allowed the lessons that she'd learned to influence her writing, and her book about Harry Potter that she'd been working on developed a much darker side compared to the first version, and it actually became a more believable and emotional story, as it actually dealt with these terrible things that can happen in life. However, even though it had become a much better story overall, when she tried to submit it to publishers, it just got rejected. Just week in, week out, there was just new rejections appearing on her doorstep. After a year, it felt like she would never get accepted. But she didn't hide from the endless rejections, and she kept going until she finally got her story published and to the world, and it went on to becoming the best-selling series in history. So as we learn from that, we must accept that failure is a part of life and just keep going. As with starting out and with success, in failure, I'm going to talk about 5 main areas that ego can blind us and stop us from having a growth mindset. First is that ego can make us blame external factors. It can lead individuals to deflect any responsibility for their failures by blaming the rest of the world around us, by blaming bad luck, competitors, or just the circumstances, and the refusal to accept personal accountability prevents them from learning from their mistakes or even seeking out how they can learn. Number 2, which sounds very similar to the first one but is slightly different, is just a general inability to learn from failure. So that's not so much about blaming the external factors and saying that this is the result of the world, but it's just running away from the failure and not seeking any lessons. You can view a setback as a blow to your self-esteem, which can just make us want to quickly move on and not think about it, and not spend time extracting valuable lessons and insights from our experiences. Like in the same way, perhaps if you're trying to learn to play the piano, perhaps you're really bad at one piece, but instead of practicing that piece, you're like, oh, that one's too difficult, and just go on and do the things that you're good at. And if you don't spend any time working on your weaknesses or stopping yourself failing where you fail, you will continue to fail there and not get better. Number 3, fear of reputational damage. Ego-driven individuals will often fear the damage that failure could do to their reputation, and this fear may lead them to hide or downplay from their failures rather than openly addressing them and learning from them, or fear ever taking the risk to do the things that could be difficult. Perhaps someone is scared of public speaking, and because they don't want to look stupid, they never invest in trying to get better. But then this prevents them from becoming a better manager or doing some of the bigger things they dream of because they can never stand up in public and talk. Number 4, panic and desperation. When faced with failure, some people might actually react with panic or desperation due to the blow to their ego, and that can lead to impulsive decisions and further setbacks rather than a rational response to the situation, which leads to number 5, which is trying to fix things by making the same mistakes. So if you suffered a failure, instead of accepting that you maybe need to learn from something and change your tactics, you do more of the same thing. Like so many people in investing lose some money doing something, and so just like the gambler that loses some money and then quickly tries to make their money back by doing the same thing, you can see the exact same thing in companies who don't make enough money doing something, so they try and do more of the same thing to make more money, but of course lose more money. Whereas if they didn't let their ego get in the way, they would accept that actually they need to learn from their mistakes and that it was genuinely a mistake, and so they wouldn't make the same mistake again. So these examples and scenarios illustrate how ego can hinder an individual's ability to cope with and learn from failure. Embracing humility, acknowledging mistakes, and using failure as a source of valuable feedback and growth is essential for bouncing back, it's essential for achieving future success, and it's the only way to have a growth mindset. In summary, ego is just a huge impediment to growth and resilience in the face of failure. And I really hope this has inspired you and maybe encouraged you to approach failure with humility, use it as a source of valuable feedback, and continue on your journey of growth with a focus on self-improvement rather than allowing ego to hold you back. Because what is rare is not raw talent, it's not skill or even confidence. These things are abundant in the world. But what is rare is actually humility, diligence, and self-awareness to have a true growth mindset. The ego that we most commonly see could have a more casual definition. It could be an unhealthy belief in our own importance, too much arrogance and self-centered ambition, as opposed to humility and willing to learn from others and help others also achieve success along with us. All you need to know and observe in yourself is this, that whenever you feel superior or inferior to anyone else, that's the ego within you talking. Because it's not about avoiding failure. It's about accepting and learning from failures and carrying on. It's not about recognition. It's about the results. And it's not about winning. It's about improving. So thank you for listening to just a few of my thoughts on ego. And as we end the episode, I should add that there is far, far more that we could go into when we talk about the ego. Relationships, how we perceive and interpret the world, how we listen to and understand others. The ego is the one thing that is always with us. It's literally inbuilt into our consciousness, and it influences our thoughts and our mindsets. So the more time that we can try to spend observing ego and not satisfying the ego's desires, the better our mindsets can be, the better our success can be, and the more time we can spend with a growth mindset. So I really hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, please feel free to mention that the show is actually by far the best podcast ever created, with probably the sexiest podcast host who happens to have untold wisdom and insight, and no one else in the universe will ever be quite so brilliant as me. Or alternatively, you could just leave a comment mentioning that the podcast was mildly above average and just try to help people find the show. That would also be fine. Thank you. Life is, of course, about enjoying yourself, so don't put that off until a future date because of these things don't happen. Be kind to yourself, and whilst you're at it, be kind to someone else too.
If learning stuff is your thing, then why not try adding a short burst of history to your morning routine?
Yeah, and we are Rebecca, Arian and Ollie, aka the Retrospectors, and we do a daily 10-minute show about history's most curious moments.
What historical events are we ticking off on this week's run?
Monday, the founding of the colony that disappeared into thin air.
On Tuesday, who invented the ice cream cone?
On Wednesday, the day the proto-Indiana Jones found Machu Picchu.
On Thursday, the anniversary of Chairman Mao's heroic dip in the Yangtze.
And on Vendredo, that's Friday in Esperanto, a potted history of invented languages.
We discuss this and more on Today in History with the Retrospectors. 10 minutes each weekday, wherever you get your podcasts.